Which side do I choose? Neither. I have a clown wig. Always go with the clown wig. Smells like a dead body. Here's the plot to the movie. A dispute led by Captain America and Iron Man leads to an all-out civil war between Avengers. And then crazy shit happens, and oh my god, Captain America's bicep curling a helicopter! Hey there guys, how are you? Sorry for the lack of videos lately and the delay on this video, but here's what happened. I was cryogenically frozen out in the desert for the last 2 weeks. That's not true, but in all reality, here's what really happened. I figured since I was the last guy on the planet to review this movie, why not take my time, see the movie 2 times, and then review the movie. And that's what I did. This movie stars a shit ton of people, but the 2 main stars are Chris Evans as Captain America and Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. Now let me simplify the plot quickly as possible because you get it, Iron Man fights Captain America, blah blah blah. Now after the events of the previous Marvel films, the government feels the need to step in and decide what missions the Avengers should go on. And after those previous events that went down in past films, past stories, you have the character of Tony Stark / Iron Man, and he feels a tremendous amount of guilt building up because he steps back and looks at all the casualties and the innocent people's lives taken, and he just feels so guilty about it, and he feels like the Avengers should be put into check and take some responsibility when they need to. And then on the opposing side of that, you have the patriotic badass Captain America, Team Cap for life, and he feels like that goes against their patriotic liberties. He feels like the Avengers should go where they're needed, do what they need to do, rather than listen to some government agency that might have other agendas. And for me personally, because I'm part of the Avengers team, when I step back and look at this, I'm just like, every time the government or SHIELD has stepped into one of these events, they've pretty much fucked shit up. Look at Captain America the Winter Soldier. Well, first of all, S.H.I.E.L.D. was secretly run by Hydra for 70 years. No one seen that coming. And they wanted to make helicarriers that blew people's heads off. And then you had other government agencies that, well, in every other Marvel film, they fuck shit up. Look at the first Avengers. New York's under attack. What do? Let's send a nuclear bomb into the city to destroy the whole fucking thing. It's like, thank you, government. I'll listen to you. Now, I know, without these plot devices, you wouldn't have a story for Civil War, but it's just like the Avengers have saved the planet multiple times. Just let them go fight their fucking missions. Of course there's going to be casualties, but it's better to have 20 dead people rather than an entire planet go extinct. So it's just like, government, fuck off. Now, Captain America Civil War is directed by the Russo brothers, who also directed The Winter Soldier, and the runtime for this movie is 2.5 hours. But in those 2.5 hours, they interject so many things, so many new characters, so many plot devices, storylines, subplots, that it could have easily been overbloated very quickly. Because that's a lot of shit to balance and put into a cohesive story that doesn't feel disconjointed and discombobulated. That's 2 words, same meaning, but I felt the need to say both of them. And this film also introduces new characters like Black Panther and Spider-Man, but the best thing about this movie is it doesn't come to a dead stop to introduce these characters. The story keeps going and progressing, and along the way, you learn new things about these characters that the film's showing you, rather than just stopping and saying, okay, here's this character, here's a backstory and flashbacks and all this random shit we don't need that take away from the progression of the story. No, this movie doesn't do that. It just interjects these things about these characters along the way, and you learn as you go. And I love that. I love when a movie can do that. It has new characters and it just throws them into the story, and it makes sense for those characters, and you learn about them along the way. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for not giving me random fucking flashbacks and an origin story. I hate that shit. All right, now let's continue on with the story of Civil War. Now, going into this movie, I really thought I was gonna 100% agree with Captain America Steve Rogers. And for the most part, I do. But when the story finally unfolds, you really do buy into both characters' reasonings for what they're doing and their motivations in the movie. And speaking of Captain America and Iron Man, throughout this film, there's some very serious scenes between these 2 characters. Some very dramatic scenes, some conversational scenes where they disagree with one another, and I really enjoyed that. And as far as the tone of this movie, at times, yeah, it's light and funny, and there's witty one-liners and cool action scenes, but at other times, it's very serious and somber. And I thought the film did a very good job at balancing those different tones, because never does the movie feel light and overly fluffy and then try to be serious, but it tries to jump into that serious scene too quickly. No, the movie progresses at a very good rate, so when something serious does happen, you're like, yeah, I get it. There's a little tear trickling down my eye, and then a few scenes later, something funny happens and you laugh. Now, let's get crazy and talk about the money shot of the film, and if you've seen the trailer, I promise you I'm not spoiling anything. Everything I'm about to say was in the trailer, so calm down. No spoilers! Now, this movie is called Captain America Civil War, and at one point in this movie, the Avengers collide head-to-head in an epic showdown, a battle at an airport. And I'd probably say this is my favorite action sequence in any Marvel film to date, because you have all these badass characters colliding head-to-head, and I'm like, yeah, we've seen things like that similar in the Avengers films, because the way the action all plays out, every character has something to do. The way that they go head-to-head with each other, it makes sense. There's interesting action sequences going on. There's some dialect going back and forth. You have Captain America going up against Spider-Man at one point, and they have like a little witty conversation. And I just really enjoyed things like that. And by the way, Spider-Man! Yeah, I think this is a good time to talk about Spider-Man during this review. Spider-Man, he's finally back where he belongs. He's not a corporate Sony who doesn't know how to write a fucking Spider-Man script. He's back home at Marvel. And guess what? They actually got a teenage kid to play Spider-Man. I know, it's crazy, right? The character of Spider-Man, who is a teenage kid, played by a teenage kid. Now, we all knew going into this movie, Spider-Man was in the movie if you watched the trailer, but going into the movie, I didn't know how much screen time he had, and I was pleasantly surprised by that. Because in the film Captain America Civil War, he does have a very prominent role in this big epic showdown at the airport, and he kicks a lot of ass, he slings a lot of web, he gives his witty little one-liners, and it was just so true to the character of Spider-Man, and it was the best representation of the character of Spider-Man I've ever seen on the big screen. So thank you, Marvel. You got Spider-Man right, and I can't wait to see what else you do with the guy. And by the way, speaking of Spider-Man, there is an introduction scene to his character, and you get a little backstory on him, and it's just, once again, this movie doesn't stop at a snail's pace to introduce these new characters. It does a great job of introducing these new characters, such as Spider-Man, within about 5 minutes of a very interesting, entertaining scene between Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark, and Spider-Man. It's one of the best scenes in the entire movie, or at least to me it was. And very quickly, before we move on, I have to talk about Aunt May in this movie. Yes, played by Marissa Tomei. Aunt May. Alrighty, it's at this point in the review I just start rambling on about random things I noticed during this movie. Now, I would say for the most part, this movie is very well filmed, very well executed. The way that the fighting sequences are edited, it doesn't feel overly choppy. You get to see what's going on. I really enjoyed it. But with all that said, it really felt like the first 30 minutes of this movie was edited and filmed by someone else, because the first 30 minutes, the way that the action sequences are filmed, they use very random camera angles, and I wouldn't say it was the best way to film some of these scenes to present what was happening. And maybe I'm crazy, but I have a weird theory about this. Now, this movie is directed by the Russo brothers. Do you think it's possible one brother directed the first 30 minutes of this movie, and the other brother directed the rest of the movie? Because that's what it almost feels like, two different directors. Okay, that pretty much covers all the random shit. Now here's my final flicking thoughts on Captain America Civil War. To sum it up, this is probably the best Marvel film to date as far as the story goes, that's interesting with subplots that make sense, the introduction to all these characters. This movie balances so many things in 2.5 hours, but it plays out so well. Now, is that to say that Captain America Civil War is a perfect film? No, it's not, because the villain of the film, it feels like a B-rate James Bond villain. The villain is the character of Zemo, who's a pre-established character from the comic books, who I know nothing about. I just know he looks like this. And in the movie, he looks nothing like that. And I'm okay with that. You can't run around in a purple spandex fucking suit. That's cool. But in this movie, the character of Zemo is kind of just a guy who wants revenge, and every scene that he's in, it just feels kind of one-dimensional. It's a little bit boring, and it kind of took me out of the movie. It's almost like every scene that the character of Zemo is in, you can take a restroom break or just eat your Sour Patch Kids and close your eyes. And my biggest complaint with the character of Zemo is he just doesn't feel very charismatic. He just feels like a guy, and I just really didn't buy into his motivations or his ability to do what he's doing in this movie. He has one of the most convoluted, complex plans in any Marvel film to date, and it's just like, that seemed a little bit overly complicated, but whatever. I guess you need some kind of driving force to make the Avengers go head to head, and I guess that was his job. And to continue on with the negatives, throughout the film, there's some very convenient plot points that happen that feel a little bit overly convenient to carry the story along. Now, they're not so obvious that they just take you out of the film, but at times it does feel a little bit lazy, or maybe they could have got a little bit more creative with little small plot points to help the characters go from point A to point B. But overall, Captain America Civil War was a kick-ass time. There's some very dramatic scenes, some very serious scenes. You really buy into the character motivations of both sides of the argument, and the action sequences, they're all top-notch. They're badass, and it's very brutal at times. So I'm going to give the film Captain America Civil War an A for America. Shit. When I punched a hole in the back of his head. Super Soldier Serum. You just never know your own strength. Okay, so that's my take on Captain America Civil War. Now here's my question to you guys, and let me know down below in the comments section. What do you guys think about this movie? What did you like? What did you dislike? And also, which side would you be on? Team Cap or Team Iron Man? Thanks for watching, guys. Please subscribe. That way I can see you next time.